Yeah, so John and I thought we'd start with his, because he said he has a lot of questions. And that's why he's so smart, because he has lots of questions. And I was keen on, I'm always keen about talking about where these photos came about. And in a way, my photos are the best way to kind of learn about me, because they're memories of where I was at certain times and what I was thinking and what was happening and what, yeah. So we thought we kind of start there, but at any point along the way, when we're talking about something and and you have a question that comes up that's somehow directly or indirectly related to these two books, I would suggest just raising your hand. We're small enough where you can raise your actual hand, and I will probably see you. And then we'll just do it like that. It's just an informal, unstructured class. Okay, so why don't we start? John, what do you got?
Well, just to reiterate that some of these book launches are done where there's a conversation for about 40 minutes and then we try and squeeze questions into the last 20, and it's never very satisfactory. So just to emphasize that at any point, if you want to raise a question or contribution, that's good for us. It's a little bit like the Tao itself. It's free flowing, and it will happen as it happens. It will emerge in some way. I'll start everyone off though and pick up where necessary. So we will look at the pictures, but we may read a few passages, Bruce. But because we don't know if everyone has read either one or both of the books, we thought the pictures were a good way to let everyone access the conversation and get involved. So interrupt, ask questions, contribute whenever you want. But just before we go to the first picture that I'd like to ask you about, Bruce, I'd just like to ask you a little bit about the two books themselves, because on the surface that maybe they seem like two very different books. One is a record of your conversation with a Chinese sage from 2 millennia ago, and the other is an account of your life in teaching with anecdotes and lessons buried very much within it. Can I just ask how you see these two books and how they relate, if they do relate? Yes.
Yeah. Before I answer, I'm just curious, how many people have read Teaching by Hand here? Interesting. Okay, good. And how many people have read The Way In and The Way Out? Probably not as many. Interesting. Great. Great. So they're both on Kindle and they're both inexpensive, and if you get interested, you know where they are. Yeah, actually, there's a terrific correlation between these two books. I remember reading somewhere, I can't remember where Aldous Huxley referred to Lao Tzu as the first Western Taoist. So another place it calls him the father of the nonverbal humanities. Interesting. And Huxley was very moved by Alexander's work. He was a wreck when he met Alexander, and Alexander helped him with numerous problems. He couldn't sleep, and then he was able to sleep. He had terrible back pains. He was typing with a heavy typewriter on his chest, lying down. He was completely petrified of speaking in groups, turning down engagements all the time. And so Alexander helped him with all these things. So he was keen on Alexander's work. And then, Huxley wrote this book called The Perennial Philosophy. So, which I read when I was in my 20s. And he was amazingly prolific when it came to his just scope of knowledge, and so wide, and kind of knew how a lot of things fit together. So somewhere I read that, that was where he put Alexander's philosophy. He said it was most theologically, theologically is not quite right for Lao Tzu, but philosophically, it was most compatible with that particular philosophy. And when I found Alexander work, I was looking for a somatic discipline that was based on philosophical truths. So I had read Zen and the Art of Archery, which a woman named Judy Leibowitz recommended to me. She was the head of the New York school, Alexander School, in the 60s and 70s. And she said, yeah, that's the best book on the Alexander technique, Zen and the Art of Archery. So I read that and I said, yes, that is what I'm looking for. I want because I don't understand anything unless I get it in my body, right? Because I was a philosophy major and I was studying so many ideas, and there were ideas on top of ideas. And it was so ungrounded in physical life. I said, I just can't go there. So I need something that I can grasp physically. The idea makes sense to me from the inside out physically. So here was a physical discipline based on Zen Buddhism, basically. And that made sense to me. And then, of course, Zen Buddhism was very influenced by Taoism, because if you track Zen Buddhism in where it came from China, right? And Buddhism and Taoism were happening simultaneously in China. And so they were influencing each other. And of course, before that, it came from India. So Taoism is sort of woven into Buddhism in interesting ways. Yeah, and then I found it took me a long time before I studied Kyudo, Zen archery, but because it just took a long time. But I found Tai Chi early on, and that was also very influenced by Taoism. Really, very, very. In fact, my teacher's teacher, Cheng Ching, did a translation of the Tao Te Ching, and it's quite good. It was one of the ones I studied. But I was looking for a Western discipline that was Taoist. Could there be something from Western culture that would speak to me? And it turns out, that the somatic movement in Europe and America in the early 20th century, late 19th century, late 19th century and early 20th century, mid 20th century, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of exciting things, a lot of exciting physically oriented movement teachers working in a different way. So it was there. And so that's a long way of saying that when I started to study Alexander technique, I was really studying it for as much philosophically and theologically as I was physically. I was looking for something that put all that together, right? So I think that what I ended up doing is, when I wrote Teaching by Hand, I wrote an Alexander book that did not reduce the Alexander technique to the body, which I think is a great disservice. And I don't think Alexander would be all that thrilled about that. And so I wrote a book that I felt put Alexander's work in a larger context and overlapped it with psychological understanding, and overlapped it with art, and overlapped it with theology, and put it in a big context. And then with Lao Tzu, I felt Lao Tzu was missing the body, that he was really connected to nature, but didn't take it into the physical life of being a human being living physically through the world. And so I brought the body into Lao Tzu's thinking. And that's how they go together for me.
Shall we go to a picture?
Yeah. You could pick one. I can share my screen.
My favorite picture is the one at the front of the way in, which is the picture of the guy painting his fence.
Okay, let's see if I can find it. Where I just had it somewhere. Okay. Let me do it this way.
I have it if you don't.
Oh, I have it. I got it. All right. So here we are. I guess that's.
There you have it.
Let's see if I do view. I'm terrible at this stuff. Where would I make it not a double page? Oh wait, maybe like this. No. Well, can you see it well enough, this picture? Carlos, does it need to be bigger? Maybe this works.
I can see it well.
There, that's better. Okay. Yeah, so there's a photo. And what I did with Lao Tzu's passages, which the traditional sinologists didn't do, is I gave them titles, and because I wanted to make them contemporary, speak to a contemporary world, and I would pick a certain line from the prose poem and hook it up with the photo. And I've been taking photos for a long time. I don't know why. I don't know anything about a camera. I still don't know how to work my camera. I can do like 2 things with it. And I have no training as a writer. I have no training as a photographer, but I like doing both of them. So I'm obsessed with a certain subject, joyfully obsessed with a few subjects. And so it motivates me to try to make sense of it. So this was taken outside of Berlin during a retreat for the Alexander Alliance. And I was right on the verge of burnout. My life was just starting to fall apart, actually, in a big way. And so that's where I was at in my life. And I've always actually been attracted to old people. Now I am one. Maybe that's why I like myself better now. I've grown into myself. But I've always been attracted to older people. intellectually, I like being around them. I like kind of figuring out how they think at that from where they are, and I find them aesthetically very beautiful. So, and I guess it's because so much history is recorded in them physically. So I find that very beautiful. And of course, taking photos of people is tricky because, you know, if you're going to catch them in an unconscious way without asking them permission, usually I end up usually photographing them from the back. Yeah. So this is called, what is this called? Awakening. Yeah, when I when I was reading Stephen Mitchell, I love Stephen Mitchell's interpretations of these. He often talks about a master, and I don't know, I don't relate to that idea of a master or even a sage. Actually, I relate to people being teachers, and I relate to people being awake. That makes sense to me. You know, like just waking up. Like some people like wake up, it seems, more than other people in certain ways. So I called it awakenings. I think I was thinking of Robin Williams too in that movie. Again, that's me trying to make it contemporary. So I wrote, when we feel trapped, it is because we have felt free. When we feel pain, it is because we have felt pleasure. Waking up, we observe our feelings fading in and fading out. Waking up, we judge people less, accept them more, including ourselves. Waking up, we find something good in everyone, speak ill of no one, including ourselves. Waking up, we do not call attention to ourselves, we give our attention to others. We talk less, we listen more, we do our work. Our work speaks for itself. Yeah.
Bruce, could
So
you
I
say
just felt, yeah, I was just going to say, I think this picture captures work speaking for itself, right? A guy who's probably doesn't talk that much, like me, just kind of does his work. And you can see where he's painted the fence, where he hasn't painted it. It speaks for itself. He's painted the fence there. And his gaze is turned toward his house, not away from his house. He's attending to his home, you know. So maybe more introspective. So that's my thought about that passage in that photo. Yeah, John.
The bit at the end there, we do not call attention to ourselves, we give attention to others. In lots of ways, right at the start of this, that's at the heart of your teaching. I think both of these books are very much about teaching. The teacher is not quite at the center because you always stand off into this blind spot behind people. But nevertheless, the teacher it's not the sage or the master, it's the teacher that is the kind of the central character. But we do not call attention to ourselves, we give our attention to others. That's a big part of your method, if it can be called that, as a teacher. Maybe you could say something more about that.
When I watched Marjorie Barstow, my main Alexander mentor, one of the things I loved about her is she always worked in the student's blind spot 90% of the time. And there are pictures of Alexander doing the same thing. That it's like in the back diagonal. And it's like if you're working with the person here, like if I'm working with a person right here, this is my favorite spot. If they're here and I'm here, right? So I can go like this and they'll turn their head and we can see. But then I just fade back here and they can't see me, but I can see them. And this, you can see a lot from a back diagonal, right? Because you can come over here, you can kind of see what's here, you can kind of here and you see what's here. And you can see down there, and you can see up here like this. And Marge would work from there a lot. And she'd just disappear. She would just kind of disappear. And her hands were also kind of like that. They were very non-intrusive. They also sort of disappeared. Her hands didn't feel like hands. Her hands just, you didn't feel her hands. You felt the result of her hands. You felt what was happening to you, right? You didn't feel what she was doing, right? You felt like what was happening to you. And then because she stood in the background, all of us, sometimes 50 of us, sometimes 100 of us, would be watching, and we were riveted on the student, on the transformation happening in front of us, of the student, right? And then very little commentary either, you know, because the work spoke for itself. You know, she did her work. There it was, see? And then she'd say, okay, who else would like to work? That was Marge. So Marge was a Midwestern Taoist, really. She's so Taoist, Midwestern Taoist. That's how she worked. So, yeah, and you know, just to let you know, like teaching online is tricky because I have a lot of material I want to get across, and everyone's looking at me rather directly when I'm teaching online. And the way that I work, so I'm not the center of attention in that situation, is my focus is on teaching people, giving people material, training people in material that they can take home. They're actually home when they're in class, that they can, there they are, they're sitting at home, they're getting that material, they're learning that material, and then they get to practice. And that's my job, you know? So if I keep myself focused on that goal, then I feel my students in the foreground for me. And then I just do my work, and then that's it. Then the rest is up to them. I do my part, and then they do their part. So that's how I deal with it online. Yeah. Does anyone else have a question? John is a great question asker. So if you don't, he'll just keep going. But does anyone have a question about anything? Unmute, Lena. Can you unmute? Yeah.
Next picture, please. Next picture.
Okay, the pictures are great. John, do you want to pick another photo, or Karen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on, John. Karen, do you have a question?
I was interested in the name of this marrow bone.
Oh, okay, great. The name for this class. Well,
Yeah.
It comes from a poem by Yeats called Prayer for Old Men, I think. And he says, God guard me from the thoughts that men think with the mind alone. He who sings a lasting song sings from a marrow bone. That's where it comes from. So one of the things, you know, because I don't think I'm like any stellar intellectual. I did my best, you know, I bumbled through college as a philosophy major. My friends were unbelievably smart. And but I think from a marrow bone. That's what I do. And so I think that's what distinguishes me as a thinker, is that I think from a marrow bone. That's where my thoughts come from. That's where they come, the good ones. That's where they come from. Yeah. So that's why I was, and then, you know, I live out here in New Mexico, and this is Georgia O'Keeffe land. So if you don't know Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings, you don't have, lots of people don't because you don't live out here, but I live exactly where she lived. And so she loved painting bones. And so that's the picture comes from one of O'Keeffe's paintings of a pelvis. She would find these white bones of cows, you know, and deer and elk and bear and mountain lion that live out here. And then when you hike in the mountains, you find them. Yeah. Yeah, anyone else? Yeah, Patrick.
Yeah, one thing I've wondered is you talk about looking for a kind of something that's somatic, is that, would that be the word, or to do with the body at least, or something that at least links into the body, and you found Alexander and Tai Chi and so on. But actually, what I seem to notice with your things is that there seems to be a lot of reference to poetry. You just made a reference there.
Mm-hmm.
And your Grace of Sense refers to the 4 quartets, I think, T.S. Eliot.
Mm.
You mentioned Rumi. And so I just wonder how, that just interests me, because I suppose poetry is perhaps not a somatic thing necessarily, but there seems to be a connection anyway. I wondered if...
Yeah, I think I was an artist since I was very young because I was a gymnast. And gymnasts, most of my gymnastic friends from high school and college became artists, painters and sculptors, and because there's something beautiful about gymnastics, you know? And I think one of the reasons I didn't make the Olympics is because my teammates always had me coaching and choreographing. They'd say, you know, I have these 5 movements, I don't know how to put them together and make them look cool together. So I was always doing that. I said, well, look, start with this movement because then you can do this transition. It's going to really surprise people when you pop into that move. And then we got to speed that one up because that one, you're holding that for 3 seconds. So let's really do something dynamic after that, you know? And so I was aesthetically oriented from very young, I think. I didn't know it at the time, but, and then one of my mentors, Peg Gumry, was really aesthetically oriented. I mean, she was hallucinating aesthetically from morning till night. And everything for her was a painting or a poem. And when she and Buzz came down for 20 years every month to Philadelphia. And so I loved being around. I gravitated to Peg. And so she kind of taught me that through osmosis, right? She said, you know, that reminds me of a poem. What you did in class today reminds me of this, right? So I think that's where that came from. Yeah. I like the interface between physical life and poetry and between image and poetry for some reason.
Can I add something here, Bruce?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. I'm probably the only person who's done this, but I might not be. But in one of my readings of The Way In, I read it alongside probably about 10 other versions or translations of the Tao Te Ching. So each verse, I read yours and I read these other translations, and it's there are many things I could say about that, but one of the things that is clear from that is that you pick up on an image from the originals that is very kind of somatically juicy or resonant in some way, and then you kind of, that's what you focus on, and that's what shapes your own writing. A lot of the translations of the Tao Te Ching are by academics, so although Taoism itself is a very embodied kind of philosophy, the actual translations themselves can be quite dry in tone, but you know, sometimes you'll pick up on just one word that has some somatic resonance for you, and then that has become the basis for the verse you write. But there's a kind of method that of looking at the world, looking at art somatically, and looking at somatics aesthetically, that happens with you, and it crosses, you know, the two fertilize each other. And a lot of what you, I mean, the first thing I learned from you was,
well, let me say something about that.
Yeah.
Before I forget. Now, see, that can take us into teaching by hand.
Mm.
So if you look at like this chapter where I write about the Libyan Sibyl, well, all the Sibyls, but particularly this one, who I fell in love with many years ago, and then in his drawings of her are very beautiful. These, yeah, and yeah, so when I teach my students, Alexander students, how to, and Grace of Sense students, how to see a person and how to see a body. I find that a lot of people in the Alexander world are stuck in looking at the body posturally or relationally, like, or even medically, like oh, well, this is out of balance this way, and there's pressure down this way, and neck and the head relationship is like this, and the pelvis is like that, and it's kind of technical. But, and I'm not saying that's a bad way to look, but it's not it's dangerous to look at that right away. If I want my students to be able to see an entire person and how they're expressing who they are through their physical medium, then the obvious way to do that is just to look at people the way we do normally, right? Like, you know, because we look at people and we're looking to see, you know, how they're feeling, how they're thinking, what's happening with them, how are they doing, you know, what do they want, yeah, and then when we look at art, when we look at sculpture of people, we're looking aesthetically, we're looking for beauty and expression and story, and I find that if I go there first with my seeing, then all the other stuff becomes really actually very easy to see. very easy. You go, yeah, of course I see that. You know, but now by the time you're seeing the sunkenness in the chest or the knees coming together or something like this, it's not objective, it's not cold, it's meaningful, it's emotional, it tells you something about this human being, you know, and then it's all there in context, you see. So that's the way I try to teach my students how to see people, whether they're teaching or not, really. That's why I say to my students sometimes, I haven't seen a person that wasn't beautiful to me for 35 or 40 years now. I just don't see them because my eye is trained aesthetically. So that's my default system, as visually, aesthetically, is to see beauty in people. That's why I've trained myself to do that.
Jenny wanted to say something.
Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm just remembering my compulsion to take notes in class with you, and one night not being able to use that part of my brain. And I have a clear memory of you somehow have inspired through the somatic and beauty of the way you work. The only choice I had was to use the poetry in my brain. That's where that poem came from. She is so beautiful.
Oh yeah, I love that poem.
We loved so much. It was the only possible way I could express the way that class took place. And it was such a different mode. And that's what I feel that happens in reading what you've written, is that it generates this whole body experience, which is also in the sort of poetic, creative part of the brain.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the reasons it's so important for some of us to go there in this kind of work is that, and this goes back to that Rumi poem, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, and I'll meet you there. So I have to meet people in a field that is out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, because once a person is in that wrongdoing and right doing mode, it's hopeless. They're not going to learn anything, right? In fact, well, they're going to learn something, but they're going to learn something that doesn't help them, that actually works against them. So you have to get a person into this field beyond wrongdoing and right doing, and aesthetics is one. Play is another one. Play and aesthetics. So once you get a person in that world, there's stuff is too interesting and beautiful that is taking place, and they forget about what's right and wrong. It just doesn't, it's not that part of the brain, right? And then they can learn something. They can have a new experience. They can go into some different world, you know, some different territory, as Marge Barstow used to say, some new territory. So that's that's pedagogy. Yeah. That's why I do that. Besides, in addition to the fact that that's just how I'm wired, right? Like that's what I find, that's my bliss, as Joseph Campbell would say. That's my nature, right? So I'm teaching out of who I am, not teaching something I learned by memory or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. How about, do you have another picture? Lena likes my photos.
Yeah, let's one from teaching by hand is the one with the window frame.
Oh, yeah. This is a good one. I'm sorry I'm showing it to you like this, but it's the quickest way for me to do it. Can you see it? Let me pin myself. Maybe that's going to make me able to do it better. Whoop. Okay. That's not too bad. That is from an old Spanish Catholic adobe church that's almost gone, but people still hold services there, special times of the year. And so I live an hour and a half from a store where I can buy food. So every 10 days I make a long list and I go down to Santa Fe and I buy food. And I always pass that church. And you're not supposed to take photos of it, but I just loved that window and I couldn't help myself. And I took a photo of it. And there was something about the same thing on the inside of the frame as on the outside of the frame, that it was the same on the inside and the outside. The only difference was that the sky, some of the sky's on the outside and some of the sky's on the inside, and it's the same sky, identical sky. And I just, God, that's amazing. And then there was a period where I was studying with this woman, Byron Katie, and who I learned a lot from. And she has this expression, she says, it's the name of one of her books, who would you be without your story that you tell yourself, without the movie you're making in your head of yourself. And then one day I saw that and I said, who would I be without my frame? Who would I be without the frame? And I'm looking at that. And without the frame, there was just no separation between me and the world. It just was so comfortable when I was able to go there in myself. And that there was really no need for this frame. Like there was no need for it. I remember Robin Avalon talking about it in a different way. She said, I was listening to her teach once, and she said, we're all walking around with parentheses around our name. Like if you write your name and you put parentheses around it. She said, we're all walking around with these parentheses. What would it be like if you just erase those? You just erase them. Like you don't really need them. They're not helping you at all. And then one day I'm driving, just like always, and there's no frame. The frame's literally gone. It just was gone. So there is no frame there anymore. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. The irony about...
Could I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I just remember in one of your courses, you had this frame. And I remember what it did to me. having the frame and taking one side off and the
Mhm.
other one and
Yeah,
the top. It was a revelation. I didn't know about the frame until I took it off.
that's it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm glad you say that, because see, then it's like, how did pedagogically you get an insight from that image, and then it's like, okay, how do I get other people to experience that, right? And what study could how could I make it so people can get that? So like there was a situation where Karen sort of got that physically, not just intellectually, but, oh yeah, I feel it. Oh yeah, right? That's the only kind of truth I really get. So that is why I became an Alexander teacher in part, was because I felt that Marjorie made me aware of things by eliminating them for momentarily. Like there was no way for me to know what I was doing because it had become me. You know, it had become invisible. I had no way of becoming conscious of what I was doing, because it's almost like it was doing me, you know? So it was only with it falling away that I could feel, oh my God, I was doing, that's what I do, you know? And it's only through the absence of it that I was able to become aware of it. And that was the real gift. It was like, okay, that's what I do. And that's why Marjorie used to say in her Taoist way, there's nothing to get. There's only something to lose. There's nothing to get. Right? But what are we holding on to that we don't know we're holding on to? Right? And we can't let it go. We can't give it up unless we know we're holding it, unless we know we're clinging to it. Yeah. You see, it all goes together, doesn't it? This Taoism and Alexander technique, was for me, it does. Does anyone else have a question? Yeah, Patrick.
I have another question just relating to what you just said, that because Tai Chi's, I guess, is based, is the kind of what you call it, martial art based on the principles of, or the understanding, the Taoist understanding, let's say, sort of non-doing thing. Having said that, I forget my question altogether. It just vanished. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, you know what? When it comes back, let me know.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's likely to pop back up.
Yeah.
Maybe I can give you a moment to rethink it, but join up the two thoughts. I teach a martial art and have done for a long time, and there's a kind of process that happens, and I'm sure it happens in all embodied arts, where at the beginning you're accumulating knowledge and you're gaining things, and then there's a moment where you're not going to progress any further unless you shift into losing stuff, into stop interfering with what you've thought was the right way. You may even have been taught that this is the right way to do it, but if you don't start to reduce, then you'll be stuck for a long time, and that's quite difficult for people to cross that transition. whether it's Tai Chi or any other embodied art, I think. Isn't it also true of teaching that when you start teaching anything, including the Alexander technique, I think that you're accumulating knowledge, methods, practices, techniques, and at some point you'll kind of get stuck there unless you begin to lose some of those. And there's a bit which I think is quite shocking to a profession or a group of people who want to help people, who want to be useful to people, and that's where I think, is it Frank Setterwell says, stop trying to help people, just see them. And
Frank Otterwell said to me once, Bruce, stop trying to help people so much and just get to know them.
Get to know them. Yeah,
that's what he said. Yeah.
Now that's quite a big transition for teachers to make, for anyone to make, but it feels like it's very central to both these books. I wonder if you'd like to say something a bit more about that.
Well, I might go back to this thing about the acquisition of skill, and then it's giving it up in a way. One of the things I liked about Alexander technique was that there was no form in the way that Marge Barstow taught it. It was like there was no exercises. There wasn't, and like, practice this, do this 10 times a day or something, right? It was, the only form was your life, your everyday life. That's all. So when she would work with us, she would say, well, what do you want to do? And then I would say, I want to do Aikido because I'm practicing 3 hours a day. And she said, well, great, come on, show me what you're doing, right? And someone else was a therapist, and they said, well, I sit with people and they have a lot of problems. Well, come on, let's do that. And then who wants to be the patient? And then she just worked with them doing it, right? So the form, it was formless in a way. And it was like she wanted to give us like the essence of what could make a difference for us, and no form, no kata. Now, it turned out that I actually love kata, Japanese tea ceremony, Kyudo, Tango, Limon technique. I mean, all the different katas, forms that I've studied, Tai Chi. So there's something I love about working in form. But at some point, you get the juice from the orange, from the fruit. You get the juice from the structure, and then you don't need the structure. But you need it for a while. You need it for a while. And but once you have the juice and once you've digested it, then it's just there, and you don't need the structure. So I'm at a point in my life, a half century later, more than a half century later, of studying form, because I really started when I was 11 with swimming and diving, working through form, where I'm at a stage where I do very well working without form and just evolving my own processes. But I don't think I could have just started there very well. So anyway, that was, well, when Marge taught the way she did, she was in her 70s when she started teaching that way. She taught through Alexander's procedures most of her life. And it was only till her later years where she dropped the form. Where she said, I don't want to teach any forms. Yeah. So that's interesting too. I had never really thought of that. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if Patrick has remembered his question or if anybody else has anything to ask or say.
No, I was thinking perhaps my question was one of those things that I needed to lose. I successfully
Maybe.
did.
Maybe. Okay, so how about let's give someone who hasn't had a chance to speak something, if you want to speak or say something or ask me something about those books. If not, maybe we'll go back to some photos.
I've got a question for you.
What, Christopher?
So one of the sentences I've got from Lao Tzu, and I don't know how accurate it is, but he said, know the masculine, but stick to the feminine.
Mhm.
And that's something that I hear a lot in what you're saying. I mean, both in like, don't look at the structure, look at the person and the whole experience of them. The frame, I think, is a kind of a angular, masculine container for art. I don't know. I teach tango and Alexander through tango, and so I kind of deal with these sexual polarity dynamics, and it's really awkward language that becomes problematic. But I feel like it's something that's a really the powerful dynamic in the universe. And so how do you speak it without saying masculine, feminine, or do you shy away from that? That's really what I'm hearing in a lot of what you're
Great
saying,
question.
but you're not saying those words. And I would
Yeah.
appreciate your.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. My sense of see, I get them mixed up, of Lao Tzu is that he's, well, and even in the literal translations, I mean, everyone translates what he calls the valley spirit as the eternal female. That's just, I call it the big mom, but it's the eternal female. So he is definitely in Chinese parlor, it would be a yin-based teacher. He has faith in the female principle. Often it's called the female principle. So if you want to take away the male-female part, it's yin might be better, or softness. You come up with words. So take away the male-female, the whole sexuality thing, and just think of it as continuums like hard, soft. Forget the male-female, just drop it. And, think of mountain and valley. That's all. Just think mountain and valley, right? He's a valley teacher. That's all. He's, mountains are wonderful. He loves valleys. That's all. He's like, well, let's look at the valley. Mountains get a lot of press. Look at that beautiful mountain. Who says, look at that beautiful valley? Valleys get bad press, in the, what's that psalm about, though I go into the valley of death or something, you know what I mean? It's like valleys get bad press, but Lao Tzu loves valleys, right? He loves little streams. He loves the low places, right? He loves fluidity. He was in a period where there people around his country was at war for 300 years, like it was like ready for some different quality, it needed to become more yin based life. And country, so he just is oriented that way.
Well,
So
can I just say that I really see you in the same way. I mean, you're not a scientist. You're so much more of an artist. I mean, you really bring that perspective through everything I've heard of you, and I think it's really unique, and I really enjoy it. And
Well,
that you
yeah,
don't use such a
yeah.
sexual thing.
I'm a male mom. That's how I think of myself. I'm a male mom. That's my kids. When Martha would go away, sometimes they would call me mom. She was gone for a week or two. It was like I became mom. So yeah, I'm a male mom. That's just it. And I feel the world feels intensely female to me. I don't know why. It's just the metaphor I choose to use. I think we should be free to use whatever sort of metaphors we want. If it brings you comfort and safety and pleasure, so for me, I live in the mom. I do the Native American thing. I love the mom, and I'm in touch with her all the time, and that's the metaphor I use. And I think Lao Tzu also, that was his metaphor. And I think we're in desperate need of it now. I mean, we're just going crazy. We need a major shift. Yeah. Yes, it's just what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know if I had that temperament to begin with, and that's why I was attracted to those thinkers, to that way of thinking, or whether they just influenced me for so many years that's how I am. I'm not sure.
It might be like what you're saying. Know the masculine, but stick to the feminine. You need to understand the structure to be able to play. You need to know the steps to be able to dance, kind of. And you're like, you spent so much time studying Alexander's work, and then you developed, your whole thing from it. And I don't know, it seems like some masculine has to go first. And then we were talking about taking things away. And it's, taking away that structure to reveal what's underneath. Maybe.
I don't know. And then, if the gender thing confuses you, you could just drop it. Like you don't necessarily have to think of structure as male. And you don't have to. Maybe it's simpler not to. I see that's the tango world is, of course, has a strong element of that. It's hard to get rid of that in tango, but in a lot of other things, you can maybe get rid of it. I don't actually, my deep experience of myself is not sexual, not male or female, of myself. I don't feel very sexual, period, at this point in my life. I feel something that's deeper than sexual. I don't think of myself in those terms so much anymore. Yeah. Anything else? Anything about the books? I don't know what we're doing for time, but we're okay. I mean, let me know when you want to stop. I'm having so much fun thinking about the books. It's like, I never talked to anyone about these books, and I put a zillion hours of my life into these books. So I'm having a good time. Suzanne, do you have any questions? You know my work well.
No, I have no questions. All is fine.
Okay. Fabian? No, okay. Let me show you some pictures and you tell me, stop me if you want to know. Let's see how we do this. If I go, if I go like this.
There's that picture of the window frame to match the one that we had before, Bruce.
Oh, it's in here, isn't it?
You've just missed it. It's
Oh,
above.
yeah. That's my bedroom in Coyote. This is a picture I used with something about breath, and where I write about breathing. It's like, what photograph do you find that will capture breath? And my idea is that the world breathes us. So it's really like the world breathes into us. And so somehow this captured it for me. Do you want me to read this to you on breathing? It's kind of nice. It's called, what's it called? It's not your job. It's called It's Not Your Job. It's not your job to breathe. It is nature's job to breathe you. It is your job to remain soft and supple. Soft and supple, your ribs will release. Your heart will unharden. Your mind will rest. Energy will return to your entire body. And you have no idea of the right way to breathe? Can you receive the air you are given without taking it? Can you allow the air to leave you without controlling it? Can you receive the air you are given without raising yourself up? Can you allow the air to leave you without pressing yourself down? Day and night, let the air of the world enter and leave through your nose as it wills. Speak audibly so others can hear. Be breathed silently so no one can hear, not even you. Breath, a sacred bridge between the breathed and the breather. As you are falling asleep, ask yourself, who is breathing? That's that one. That's very Alexandrian. So, the way Alexander the Taoist said it, he said, at last, I find that when I don't breathe, I breathe. So that's how he says it. These are photos from Great Dunes National Park in Colorado, about 3 hours from my house. I am totally fixated on these dunes because they're the mom. They're so sensual. They're so female for me. They are, and there's so much. I think of, I often refer to the body as landscape and use a lot of landscape words for the body, but I think of the landscape as body. So these really are very much landscape as body photos. This is one of my favorite sort of like my Cezanne photograph. I think of Cezanne when I see this. It's more like a painting. It was in Germany during that similar time. Same time I took a picture of that old guy. This is, what's this called? Between You and Me. It's called Between. Very, just different images, but such clear Lao Tzuian ideas. Bodies exist within space. Space exists within bodies. How could we eat or speak without the space inside our mouths? How could we play the piano or write a letter without the space between our fingers? How could we walk in the woods without the space between the trees? Wind blows through the branches, leaves rustle, trees sway. We cannot see the wind, but we know it's there.
Bruce,
Yeah.
can I, talking about space and talking about not doing things such as breathing, can I just ask one question, and perhaps that will start heading us towards an end, as it were. There's a sentence in one of the books that I found quite shocking, and that is simply that after decades of practice, one day you gave up Tai Chi and dance. Just like that, it seems. And I also am aware that you have recently handed over the work of decades, the Alexander Alliance, to the next layer of leadership of that organization. So there seems to be a kind of a theme of shedding, of losing things, perhaps to make space for what's next. So I guess the question is, what's next, and what's that space about? And it's a lot to give up.
Yeah, that's a great. Let's end on this this thought. This is a good place to end, I think. There's a lot there. The giving up of Tai Chi, even though I must confess, just recently I start to do it in a very, very different way, giving myself permission to change the form whenever I want. But I'm sort of playing and still playing inside of it, but not in any disciplined way. I mean, I did Tai Chi twice a day for 40 years, maybe missing 10 days out of that whole time. So I'm a rather disciplined fellow. But that happened when I realized that I needed to follow my nose. I needed to just work from the inside out, and needed to listen to my body now, and that I had enough resources and skill that I would know how to listen. And it's been really creative. I mean, it's been really, I think, the most creative part of my life since I really stopped these forms. But I think I needed them for a long time. So that's that. And then in terms of the school, well, I'll tell you, that was not easy transition. My identity is so connected to the school because I started it when I was 32. And so that's almost 40 years. I started about 40 years ago. And, it's been and I've been in charge of it for 40 years. So to give it away was kind of a brave thing to do, I guess would be the word. And scary and brave, they tend to go together. But now I'm feeling really good, very good about it. I'm still a little bit in shock, but I'm feeling very good about it. I can really feel it was exactly the right time and exactly the right thing to do, and giving it to exactly the right people. So can't be luckier than that. And I'm really confident it's going to go on for at least another 40 years, because some of those people that are taking it on are like in their mid 30s, you know, so super dedicated, super talented. And, you know, so I feel it's really in good, literally in good hands. And there's a mystic Jewish concept called sitzum, and it means, I mean, it's hard to explain it to understand, but in a simple way, it would mean receding with influence. Receding with influence. It's like there's a time where by drawing back and getting smaller and smaller, but more concentrated somehow, almost like a black hole or something, you know, by going back and back and back, you're creating space for other people to learn what they need to learn, because it takes practice, like to learn how to direct a school, you know, and to be in charge of it financially and as a, you know, promotionally and every way, in charge of its curriculum and so on. So they really, you know, you have to really take responsibility for it, and you have to practice doing it. And they can't practice that if I'm doing it. So it's like I pull back, but they feel me behind them. They feel me there. And I think that's good. So, yeah. So anyway,
Hey, Bruce,
it's not like
that might pull it back to that 3/4 stance that you admired from Margine, receding behind the student a little bit.
yeah, that's it. It's just this receding, and yeah, so that's what's going on. It's a big one. It's a big one. Yeah, I mean, the only way you can save something is to give it away. How else can you save it? It's the way you save things. And then what was the last thing you said about
What's next
what's next?
for you?
Grace of sense is what's next. You know, grace of sense for me, that during COVID, I wrote 2 books. I didn't publish them, but one was called In Good Company, The End of Living Alone. And the other book is called The Robes of the Desert, Character and Its Somatic Expression. Or there's another subtitle, more recent, it was called What It Means to Live a Non-Egocentric Life. So anyway, those were the 2 books I wrote, and during COVID. And then being terrible at figuring out how to publish a book, I thought, well, what good material for Grace of Sense? I'll just use this material. So that's my new territory, is, you know, who am I as a person and teacher without the Alexander Alliance and without all my forms and without the Alexander technique, right? Without those boxes. So that's the experiment. Where will I go if I don't have to define my work inside any particular box. Where will it go? That's where I am.
Well, perhaps that's where we should, that we've had the way in and now it's time for the way out.